Nathan froze in the empty hallway. He heard the young woman in the next room talking about working 2 shifts a day to take care of her sick sister. Her voice was steady and soft, but full of strength. Nathan felt his chest tighten. A tear suddenly slipped down his face, catching him off guard. He had no idea why just a few words from a stranger could hit him that hard. He turned away slowly, trying to hide his emotions, but his whole body was still shaking from the depth of what he had just felt. Nathan had always lived alone in a house so big that even his own footsteps echoed like they belonged to someone else. He was wealthy, successful, and seen by many as a symbol of luck. But the only thing he felt every morning when he opened his eyes was emptiness. For years, he watched relationships come and go for one reason. People wanted a piece of his money. They smiled at him for gain. They acted kind because they hoped he would help them. Little by little, Nathan no longer knew what sincerity looked like. He started to fear smiles, fear small talk, fear the feeling of being looked at like a walking wallet. That sense of isolation pushed him to want to leave everything behind. One morning, while sitting quietly by the window, Nathan had a thought. It was time to try living like an ordinary person. No one would recognize him. No one would know how much he owned. He wanted to see if the world still had real people and real kindness. So he made a plan to step away from everything familiar. No driver, no luxury car, no expensive clothes. Nathan chose an old jacket, a pair of worn shoes, and a backpack he had used years ago. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. Just a regular traveler. No one would look at him and guess the millions in his account. He moved around in the simplest ways he could. Walking, booking ride services, doing all the procedures on his own like everyone else. No one paid attention to him, and no one tried to impress him. Nathan felt lighter. A quiet sense of freedom began to rise in him, like he had finally slipped out of a heavy coat he had worn his entire life. After a few hours on the road, Nathan chose a small lodge in a quiet suburb. It was the kind of place he never thought he would stay in. An old wooden building, slightly worn steps, and a warm yellow light hanging by the door that made the place feel simple and real. There were only a few cars in the parking lot. The air had a calm, rustic warmth he had not felt in a long time. When Nathan walked into the lobby, the receptionist looked up and gave him a friendly enough smile. Not overly cheerful like someone trying to impress a VIP, but not cold either. Just a normal, gentle greeting. Somehow that made Nathan feel at ease. He checked in, and no one looked at him with curiosity or caution. No one judged the clothes he was wearing. No one tried to guess who he was. His room was small, with a bed covered by a faded blanket that had been washed many times. Nothing was perfect, but everything felt real. Nathan set his backpack down, sat on the edge of the bed, and listened to the wind outside the window. A place like this might not offer comfort, but it gave him the one thing he had been missing: peace. He wondered if a few days here could give him what he was searching for. If this little place, with its ordinary people, could help him see life differently. Nathan had no answer, but for the first time in a long while, he felt willing to try. It was as if something beyond those old wooden walls was waiting for him to reach out. Nathan stepped out of his room the next morning, still carrying the lightness that the little lodge had given him. The quiet space and the sound of the wind slipping through the thin curtains made everything feel strangely peaceful. As he walked down the hallway toward the lobby, a small scene caught his attention right away. Near the resting area, a group of guests were scrambling to find something. They opened bags, checked under chairs, and talked to each other in worried voices. In the middle of their rush, Nathan saw a young woman bending down to help them. She moved quickly, her hands steady, her eyes focused as if she wanted to make sure she didn't miss a single spot. What caught Nathan's attention wasn't the way she was searching, but her attitude. Sincere, proactive, and without a hint of reluctance. That young woman was Ivy. She had a small but energetic build. Her hair was tied neatly at the back of her neck, with a few loose strands falling along her face, giving her a younger look. Her skin was bright and balanced, but there was a faint shadow under her eyes. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from giving up, but the kind that comes from someone who has to push through every single day. It made Ivy look both strong and fragile in the most honest way. After searching for a while, Ivy suddenly stood up with a small wallet in her hand. The group of guests let out a breath of relief. Ivy smiled, a natural smile as soft as a quiet morning light, then handed the item back to them. There was no sense that she was trying to be sweet. She was simply kind. When the guests walked away, Ivy turned and caught sight of Nathan standing near the water station. She walked over and gave him a small nod. "Good morning, sir." Her voice was soft, steady, and never lifted or stretched like she was trying to impress anyone. Nathan smiled back, feeling oddly unfamiliar with the experience of someone greeting him so naturally. "No, we're honored to serve you." "No, you're an important guest," just a simple greeting. Polite, but not dressed up. He watched Ivy go back to her work. She picked up a towel the guests had dropped and folded it neatly. Then she straightened a pillow on the chair so it lined up just right, and moved a few water bottles that had shifted to the side. Small tasks, but Ivy handled them with rare care. She worked as if every detail mattered, as if other people's comfort was something she truly cared about. Nathan noticed a little habit of hers. Every time she finished a task, she let out a quiet breath, then gave herself a tiny smile, like she was reminding herself to stay bright. But in the moments when she thought no one was watching, her eyes showed a brief flicker of worry. Just a second, but Nathan saw it. She was carrying something heavy, a pressure she hid behind her smile every day. When Ivy walked past him, Nathan decided to say something simple. "You work very carefully." Ivy looked a little surprised but kept her usual smile. "I just try to do my best. People come here to rest, and I want them to feel a little comfortable." It wasn't the kind of answer that sounded like, "Yes, that's my duty." What Ivy said warmed Nathan. He didn't hear obligation, only sincerity. Ivy continued cleaning around the lobby. Nathan sat down on a wooden chair and watched her from a distance. Not with curiosity or intrusion, but with a gentle interest in someone whose inner kindness seemed even deeper than her simple appearance. He noticed the way Ivy bent down to pick up something someone had left behind, the way she adjusted the curtains so the sunlight wouldn't hit the lobby too harshly, the way she paused for a few seconds when she spotted a small scratch on the table and tried to wipe it, even though she knew it wouldn't come off. She worked as if she were taking care of a space that belonged to her. Those small details made Nathan feel something shift inside his chest. A feeling he had not felt from anyone in a very long time. Genuine warmth. Not the kind people put on to win him over, but the kind that comes from someone who is kind by instinct. When Ivy walked into a room in the back to keep working, Nathan kept looking in her direction, a vague emotion rising in him that he couldn't name. He only knew that Ivy drew his attention. Not because of her appearance, but because her presence carried something different. Gentle, simple, yet deeply touching. Nathan sat there for a while longer, thinking as he felt a quiet warmth move through him in a way he couldn't explain. He didn't know why. He only knew that from the first moment he met Ivy, he had started caring about her more than he expected. That afternoon, Nathan decided to go back to his room to grab the jacket he had forgotten. As he left the lobby, his mind was still filled with the image of Ivy working non-stop, yet keeping her smile. The hallway was quiet, lit only by soft light coming through the small windows, casting long stripes across the wall. As he got closer to his room, Nathan heard the sound of a cart and soft voices ahead. He recognized Ivy's. The door to the room next to his was slightly open, and the cleaning cart blocked part of the walkway. Nathan slowed down, not wanting to interrupt. He stopped a few steps away, planning to wait until they finished. From where he stood, he could see part of the room. Ivy was changing the bed sheets, while another girl stood near the bathroom folding towels. They talked to each other, their voices calm but clear in the quiet hallway. "You're still taking the night shifts?" the coworker asked. "Yeah, I have to work every night this week," Ivy answered as she smoothed the sheet. "If I don't, Emma's medicine money won't be enough." Nathan frowned slightly. Emma. He guessed that was Ivy's sister. "Both morning and night? Do you ever take a break?" the other girl asked, her voice carrying real concern. Ivy let out a soft laugh. "A break would be nice, but bills don't take breaks." It sounded like a joke, but there was a layer of fatigue under it. Even so, Ivy's voice never turned heavy. She talked like it was simply a normal part of life, not something to complain about. Nathan stood still in the hallway, his hand on his doorknob but not turning it. He didn't want to eavesdrop, but every word slipped through the cracked door and reached him anyway. "How's Emma doing lately?" the coworker asked. "Doing a little better," Ivy said, her hands never stopping. "The doctor said, as long as we stick to the treatment, she'll improve slowly." so I'm trying to keep every appointment and not miss any. That's why you're working 2 shifts every day? Yeah, morning here, sometimes extra hours. Then in the afternoon and evening, I work somewhere else. It's not forever, just for now. She spoke like she was describing a normal schedule. No sighs, no dragging her voice. Nathan could hear a hint of tiredness, but not the kind that comes from giving up. It was the tiredness of someone swimming against the current but refusing to stop. What about your studies? The coworker asked, lowering her voice. I remember you said you wanted to go back to school. Ivy went quiet for a few seconds. Nathan felt that silence clearly, as if he were standing inside the room with them. The soft rustle of the bedsheet filled the gap before her voice came again, gentler this time. I still want to, Ivy said. I still review my old lessons on my laptop whenever I have free time. But right now, Emma comes first. School. I'll save it for later. You don't feel sad about that? The coworker asked. Of course I do. Ivy let out a soft laugh, but this one sounded thin and light, like it could fade into the air at any moment. But I don't want to look back someday and regret choosing myself over someone I love. If I wait a few more years to go back to school, I can still study. But if I don't take care of Emma now, I don't know if the chance will still be there. Nathan felt his throat go dry. He leaned back gently against the wall, his eyes fixed on a vague spot on the floor. There was no self-pity in her words, only acceptance and responsibility. How's your savings going? The coworker asked. Slow, Ivy said, her voice steady. I try to save every bit, cut everything I don't need. I barely go out, don't buy anything except necessities. But it's fine. I think as long as I can keep working, someday it'll be enough. Then she added a sentence, quiet but so clear that Nathan felt each word stamp itself into his mind. As long as I can help the person I love, I'll keep trying. That sentence echoed through the narrow hallway like a quiet vow. No drama, no raised voice, no tears. But it struck straight into the deepest part of Nathan's chest, the part he thought had dried out long ago. He suddenly remembered all the people who had walked away from him after a single refusal. The parties filled with laughter but not a single look of real concern for him. The times he tried to open his heart only to be used. Those memories had stacked into thick armor, convincing him that genuine kindness out in the world had grown thin, almost gone. Yet here, through this barely open door, a young woman with tired eyes was living the opposite of that belief. She worked 2 shifts a day, put her own dreams on hold, saved every cent, and still talked about life with a calm, hopeful voice. Nathan felt something rise in his chest, a mix of hurt and warmth, like someone was squeezing his heart, then letting it open again. Her coworker sighed. I don't know how to help you, Ivy. You working here with me is already helping, Ivy said, her footsteps tapping softly on the floor as she moved around the room. Sometimes just having someone to talk to makes everything feel a little less heavy. Nathan blinked several times. He couldn't remember the last time he talked to someone without having to question their motives. He couldn't remember the last time he believed someone might help him simply because they wanted to. He couldn't see Ivy's face from where he stood, but he pictured the tired shadows under her eyes, the gentle smile he had seen that morning. Now, paired with the words she was saying, everything felt different. Behind that smile was a whole world of responsibility, worry, and hope. And she still chose to be kind. Suddenly, Nathan felt his eyes sting. He tried to swallow the feeling down, but he couldn't. A warm tear slipped from the corner of his eye and fell onto the back of his hand, where a few veins stood out. He stared at the tear in quiet surprise. It had been a long time since he cried because of something human, not because of disappointment or anger. He slowly turned his face away, as if afraid someone might walk down the hallway and see him like this. But it was only him, the wooden wall, and Ivy's steady voice drifting from the room. In that moment, Nathan felt ashamed of himself, not because he had been hurt, but because he had been so quick to believe that his pain gave him the right to judge the whole world. He had convinced himself that kindness was something from fairy tales, no longer real in everyday life. Yet here today, a cleaning girl whose hands spent every day touching bedsheets, towels, and dust was the clearest proof that kindness was still alive. He took a long breath, trying to steady himself. Inside his chest, the emptiness he had carried for so long felt a thin line of light slip through it. Small, but real. Nathan understood that something important had just happened inside him. Not a loud shift, but the kind that begins with a hairline crack in the thick wall he had built around his heart. when he quietly turned the doorknob and stepped inside, closing it behind him. Nathan knew one thing. From the moment he heard Ivy say, "As long as I can help the person I love, I'll keep trying," he had regained something he thought he had lost long ago: his faith in people. After that afternoon of accidentally overhearing their conversation, Nathan went back to his usual routine in the lodge, but there was one thing he couldn't deny. Every time he walked into the hallway or went down to the lobby, he found himself unconsciously looking to see where Ivy was. Not to follow her, and not out of intrusive curiosity. It was simply because her presence made the space feel lighter, brighter, and it made him feel calmer too. Even so, Nathan kept acting like an ordinary guest. He didn't want Ivy to realize he had overheard something personal, and he didn't want her to feel watched. So whenever he had the chance, he only spoke to her with light, simple questions. One morning, Nathan was standing by the water station when Ivy walked over to replace the jug. She gave him her familiar smile. "I hope you slept well," Ivy said. Nathan nodded, replying with a sincerity he rarely used with strangers. "The room here gives me the quiet I really needed." Ivy smiled softly. "I'm glad you like it here. This lodge is small, so we don't have many services, but everyone here tries their best." She said it with genuine pride, as if her cleaning job was something she truly wanted to do well, even if most guests barely noticed those small details. Nathan asked a few more questions about the area, the weather, and what tourists usually did around there. Ivy answered gently, never trying to make herself stand out. Everything she said felt so natural that Nathan sensed she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply being herself. In the days that followed, they occasionally crossed paths and exchanged small conversations. Nathan always kept his questions moderate, never touching her personal life. He knew exactly how people's eyes changed when they felt someone was digging into their private world. Even so, Ivy sometimes shared little pieces of her life on her own. Not complaints, just small stories from her day. Once, when Nathan was standing outside looking at the clouds, Ivy walked by and said, "Emma has a doctor's appointment this afternoon. I hope nothing new comes up." Nathan turned to her and gently asked, "Emma is your sister?" Ivy nodded. "Yeah, she's been sick since she was little. I just want her to have a normal life like other kids." She spoke with a warm tone, as if just mentioning her sister softened her. Nathan didn't ask anything deeper, even though part of him wanted to. He only said, "I'm sure she's very lucky to have you." Ivy looked a bit surprised, but her smile grew gentler. "I'm just doing what I can." Another time, while Ivy was tidying up the lobby, Nathan sat on a couch reading an old newspaper. He asked, "Have you ever thought about studying something new? I mean, in the future?" It was a question he had weighed carefully before saying aloud, afraid it might touch something painful. But Ivy didn't seem bothered. She only paused for a few seconds. "I want to study design," she said. "Graphic design or interior design. I like creating things that make people feel comfortable." Nathan watched the way she set a pillow back on the sofa, adjusting it just slightly so it looked balanced. Suddenly, he understood that her interest wasn't something she said casually. "You seem like you'd be good at it," he said. "I hope so," Ivy said with a small smile, then bent down to pick up a piece of paper someone had dropped. "But I'll probably have to wait a while. I want things to be a bit more stable before I think about going back to school." Nathan heard the quiet truth in her voice, but she didn't lace it with sadness. It was simply something she accepted with calm resolve. From moments like these, Nathan slowly realized that Ivy was the kind of person who never complained, even when she had every reason to. She didn't show off her sacrifices, and she didn't seek pity. She just lived with a kind of sincerity he hardly saw anymore. Whenever Ivy wasn't looking, Nathan would leave a small tip on the cleaning cart, just enough that she wouldn't question it. And when she brought fresh towels to his room, he would offer a simple, steady compliment like, "Thank you for always being so careful with your work." No over-the-top praise, no attention that would make her feel watched. Ivy accepted everything with a gentle smile. There was a moment when she said, "You're one of the kindest guests I've ever met." And Nathan knew she meant it. What surprised him most was that Ivy never asked too much about his personal life. She didn't ask where he came from, what he did for a living, or whether he had a family. She saw him exactly as he appeared. An ordinary man renting a room for a few days. That simplicity was something Nathan valued more than anything. Then, In a quiet moment, as Nathan sat in his room with the window slightly open to let the breeze in, he realized how tangled his feelings had become. He wanted to help Ivy, not just with small tips, not just with a few encouraging words. He wanted to do something that truly mattered, something that could make her life a little lighter. But the moment that thought appeared, worry wrapped around him. If he helped her, would Ivy think he saw her as pitiful? Would she feel insulted? Would she think he was trying to step into her private life? Nathan placed his hand on his chest and took a deep breath. He had seen how badly some people reacted when a rich person tried to help them. He knew pride could be fragile but sharp like glass. And for the first time in many years, Nathan asked himself with real fear, if I try to help her, will I end up hurting her? That question kept repeating in Nathan's mind for days after. Every time he saw Ivy walking down the hallway with her cart or bending down to pick up something a guest had dropped, he reminded himself, this was a girl who always put others first. From the way she talked about Emma, about the medicine, about putting her studies on hold, Nathan became more certain of one thing. Ivy almost never thought about herself. He started noticing more. When a guest asked for extra towels, Ivy brought them even when her shift was almost over. When a coworker said she was tired, Ivy took over some of her tasks and laughed, telling her, let me do it, you go home a little early. To most people, those were tiny actions. But to someone who had spent years seeing through people's motives like Nathan, he knew one thing. None of that was for show. One afternoon, after thinking about it for a long time, Nathan decided to go to the front desk and ask to speak with the manager. He was invited into a small office in the back, with a desk covered in paperwork. The manager was a middle-aged woman with a friendly face, though slightly tense from work. Nathan kept the steady tone of an ordinary guest. He said he was very impressed by how the staff worked here, especially Ivy. He asked if the lodge had any kind of support program for employees in difficult situations, like an emergency fund, educational assistance, or connections to community organizations. The manager looked a bit surprised, but not suspicious. She sighed and explained that the lodge was just a small establishment with limited profit, so programs like that were still very restricted. Sometimes they managed to connect with a few local charities that helped cover part of the medical costs for employees' families, but not enough to truly change anyone's situation. Nathan listened without revealing any emotion. He simply nodded and asked a few more questions about how the lodge handled those types of assistance, the process, the paperwork, and how they chose who would receive help. He said he had been part of a few community projects before and wanted to contribute, but preferred doing everything through an existing system rather than putting his name on it. When he left the office, Nathan already had a clear plan in mind. On the way back to his room, he felt his heart beating a little faster. Not because he was afraid of spending money, but because he was afraid of doing it wrong. Afraid that something done out of respect might accidentally hurt Ivy's pride in a painful way. He sat for a long time on the chair by the window, looking out at the small yard in front of the lodge. The wind moved gently through the trees, making the leaves tremble. Nathan thought about the years he had spent in a world of numbers and contracts, where money always came with conditions. But this time, he wanted to do something completely different. Help without expecting anything in return, not even a direct thank you. Nathan finally decided to donate a large sum under the name An Anonymous Guest through the employee support program the lodge was trying to maintain. He requested that a small scholarship fund be created with a clear purpose, to support an employee in a difficult situation who wished to continue their studies in the future. The management would be responsible for reviewing and choosing the recipient. He didn't need to say anything, but the manager immediately thought of Ivy. Even so, Nathan pretended he had only heard that the staff here worked hard and wanted to lend a hand. He signed the paperwork, left the minimum amount of contact information, and emphasized that he didn't want his real name to appear anywhere. At the same time, he reached out to a community organization the lodge had previously partnered with and sent an additional amount, on the condition that most of it would go toward medical care for a young employee who is taking care of her sick sister. No name, no face, just a description. A few days later, the lobby suddenly felt livelier than usual. Nathan sat on a chair with a newspaper in his hands, though his eyes kept drifting toward the front desk. Ivy had been called over. She walked up, still wearing her uniform, a cleaning cloth in her hand. The manager held a stack of papers and smiled as she told Ivy there was a new support program, and she was the first to receive it. She explained that an anonymous guest had donated to create a scholarship for an employee in a difficult situation, along with medical assistance through their community partner. Ivy listened to every word, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Wait, you mean?" Ivy stammered, glancing around as if checking whether someone was playing a joke on her. "It's real," the manager said, handing her the confirmation papers. "This amount is enough for you to start a part-time design program in the near future, and the rest will cover most of Emma's medical treatment for a while." Ivy covered her mouth. Her shoulders trembled. In that moment, all the calm she carried every day seemed to fall away. The double shifts, the nights of worry, the times she chose family over what she wanted, all of it hit her at once. Nathan couldn't make out every word Ivy said after that. He only saw her eyes turn red, tears spilling over, and then she broke down crying right there in the lobby. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady tears streaming down her face as her hand shook while holding the papers, as if she were afraid they might disappear. I don't even know what to say." Ivy choked out. I think maybe. Luck finally found someone who kept trying." That sentence hit Nathan in the chest like a soft blow. He turned his face away, looking down at the newspaper in his hands so no one would see his eyes welling up. His whole body felt tight, not from pity but from witnessing the moment hope finally became real in the life of someone who truly deserved it. From where he sat, Nathan didn't step forward, didn't interfere, didn't accept any gratitude. He just stayed still, gripping the newspaper like a thin shield to hide the slight tremble in his hands. Inside him, something shifted quietly, but he left it untouched. He simply watched Ivy wipe her tears, hold the papers to her chest, and smile through them as if she finally took her first deep breath after a journey far too long. Nathan woke up early that morning. The first sunlight slipped through the window, spreading a warm feeling across the small room. He packed his things slowly, as if every movement marked the end of something. The old backpack was placed back in its usual shape, neat and light. Nathan looked around the room one last time. It wasn't the most luxurious place he had ever stayed, but it was the place where he had felt closest to himself after many years. When he lifted the backpack onto his shoulder and opened the door to step into the hallway, the lodge was as quiet as any other morning, but Nathan knew that for him, everything had changed. He walked slowly, wanting to remember every small sound, every patch of light and shadow along the wooden corridor. When he reached the lobby and was about to check out, he saw Ivy arranging a few brochures on the table. She looked up, saw Nathan, and her face brightened with her familiar smile. "Are you leaving today?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying the sincerity that made people feel at ease. Nathan nodded. "I have to get back to work, but these few days here, they've been better for me than I expected." Ivy smiled again. Still that gentle smile, never showy, never forced. "I'm glad to hear that. Not every guest enjoys a small lodge like this." Nathan looked at her for a few seconds, then said quietly, "You make this place a lot more comfortable." Ivy flushed a little, then lowered her head in thanks. "I'm just trying to do my part." She paused as if searching for the right words. Then she added softly, "I also want to thank you for being kind the whole time you were here. Not every guest is like that." Nathan knew she wasn't talking about the support she had just received. She had no idea he had anything to do with it. She was thanking him for small things. Greetings, smiles, respect, and somehow, that made his chest feel heavier in a gentle way. "I hope you achieve what you're hoping for," Nathan said. "I believe you will." Ivy lifted her eyes. In that look, there was gratitude and a hope that had just been lit again. "I believe kindness always finds its way back to you," she said. "Maybe not right away, but it comes back at the right time." That sentence made Nathan take a few seconds to steady himself. He felt something warm rise from his chest to his throat. A part of him wanted to pull this young woman into a hug, as if to say the world needed people like her more than she knew. But he held the feeling back, keeping everything within the boundaries it needed to stay in. He simply smiled. "You're right." Ivy walked him to the door. He stopped at the steps and looked back one last time. She stood there with her hand on the wooden door, her face as gentle as the morning itself. She gave him a small wave. Nathan waved back, then walked away. Walking across the yard, Nathan felt himself breathing easier than he had in a long time. The usual sense of loneliness was gone, and so was the heaviness he carried whenever he thought about his life. In its place was something lighter, softer, as if a part of his heart he thought he had lost had just been put back where it belonged. When the car arrived, he sat inside and watched the small lodge shrink in the rearview mirror. He didn't try to hold on to the moment. He simply let it drift, like a lesson meant to stay with him for the rest of his life. On the way back, Nathan thought about Ivy, about the calm she carried when talking about hardships that would have broken someone else, about the smile that never fully disappeared, no matter how much pressure clung to her, about the way she tried, not for herself, but for the person she loved. And Nathan understood something very clearly. He wasn't the one who healed Ivy. Ivy was the one who healed him. Her quiet simplicity was what pulled him out of the darkness he had drowned himself in for years. He understood that sometimes you have to step outside the places you're used to, touch the lives of ordinary people, to find the part of yourself you've been neglecting. People like Ivy don't need spotlights or grand recognition. They simply live in a way their heart believes is right. And sometimes that alone is powerful enough to change the life of a stranger. A few weeks later, Ivy began her new journey. She enrolled in a part-time design course, prepared a new schedule, and rearranged her life to chase a dream she had postponed for far too long. Every time she saw Emma smile, Ivy silently thanked the stroke of luck that arrived at exactly the right moment. She didn't know the name of the person who helped her, didn't know his face, didn't know the reason. Only that he was an anonymous guest who stayed at the lodge for a few days. Someone who probably passed through her life like any other guest. But because of him, the road ahead of her was brighter, gentler, and lighter on her shoulders. And somewhere else, Nathan still remembered the morning she said that kindness always finds its way back. He believed that. Not because he had just done something kind, but because he had witnessed someone live with kindness even when they had nothing left to give. The story ends here with a simple but powerful truth. Kindness always leaves a mark, even when no one knows who created it. And sometimes those marks are enough to lift an entire life forward. Thank you for listening to the story. See you next time.